If you're preparing to take a licensing exam and you're having anxiety but you're not planning on doing anything about it, then don't watch this video. Don't waste your time. It's not going to do you any good. On the other hand, if taking a licensing exam test, passing it, is the key to opening your future, getting a higher position, maybe greater pay, but anxiety is getting in the way and you're ready to do something about it, then this video is for you. Today I'm going to share with you the 5 steps or parts to the licensing exam process. Now, that may seem a little redundant, but let me tell you, as you understand each of the parts and the differences between them, it gives you the opportunity to more effectively choose specific anxiety-reducing strategies that will be more effective and give you less anxiety and more confidence facing your licensing exam. So how would I know anything about this? Well, as it turns out, I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and in order to get my license, I had to pass 2 state licensing exams. Now, to be honest with you, it took me more than 1 try, and it created a great deal of anxiety for me. In fact, I had more anxiety over those exams than I've ever had over any other exams in my life. So I know a little bit about what it's like to have test anxiety, have to take an exam, a licensing test or exam that has such a huge impact on your life, and yet have a great deal of anxiety to deal with during the process. Additionally, my wife is a registered nurse, and she too had to take a licensing exam. Now, of course, that doesn't make me the world's greatest expert on test anxiety, but it gives me a good start in understanding what you might be going through, and some of the strategies and tools I'll be sharing with you not only just come from research and book smarts, they also come from real-life practical experience. As an example of how understanding the 5 parts or steps to the licensing process can help you identify a better, more effective anxiety-reducing strategy, let me give you an example with a common strategy that many people use: medication. Now, of course, you should talk to your medical professional, doctor or otherwise, before you start taking something like that. But a common medication that is used for anxiety is benzodiazepines. However, if you're using that during this period of time where you're studying before your test, you might run into some problems. You see, it causes drowsiness, difficulty concentrating, and worst of all, memory problems. Can you imagine spending weeks and weeks studying for your licensing exam only to have the very medication that's supposed to be reducing your anxiety actually putting Swiss cheese in your memory? Not a great thing. On the other hand, beta blockers, a couple of them, Inderal and Tenormin, could perhaps, in a single dose situation just before your exam, help produce reduced anxiety, and that's in the sense that it reduces the physical responses to anxiety without the problems related to memory. Of course, there's still side effects to it, such as weakness, dizziness, and drowsiness, which may also interfere with that long-term process of studying before you take your exam. However, at the time of the exam, a single dose of a beta blocker might be very helpful. I would highly recommend that you talk to your medical professional about that and perhaps take a dose ahead of time just to make sure that some of the other side effects don't end up interfering with you actually taking your licensing exam. Now, to be real honest with you, I'm not really crazy about medications as a solution for anxiety. And here's a good explanation as to why. There are many questions about their long-term effectiveness in reference to anti-anxiety medication. According to the American Academy of Family Physicians, benzodiazepines lose their therapeutic anti-anxiety effect after 4 to 6 months of regular use. And a recent analysis reported in the Journal of American Medicine Association Psychiatry found that the effectiveness of SSRIs in treating anxiety has been overestimated and in some cases is no better than a placebo. So what you basically have is anti-anxiety medication that only works for a while, or it isn't working as well as it should. But there's more. What's more, it can be very difficult to get off anxiety medications without difficult withdrawals, including rebound anxiety that can be worse than the original problem. Are you serious? You take this medication to reduce your anxiety, it stops working, and then when you try and get off of it, you actually have worse anxiety? Yeah, that's just part of the reasons why I'm not a huge fan of medication as a solution. But still, it's a commonly used process to reduce anxiety, and in the right place, in the right time, it could potentially give you some significant benefits. And that's why I think that learning about those 5 steps to the licensing process and how the different strategies can interact with them can give you a much better chance of choosing a strategy that will be really effective to reduce your anxiety and increase your confidence as you're facing your licensing exam. So what exactly are the 5 steps or 5 parts to the licensing exam process? Well, we'll start out with the obvious one, studying. The study time is your longest period in your test licensing exam process. It can last a few weeks up to a few months, depending on your licensing exam, the complexity of it, the amount of preparation materials you have, your level of confidence, and all these other things. So during this time period, which strategies might be most useful for you? Keeping in mind that the study period of your licensing exam process is probably the longest part of this process, whatever strategy you use to reduce your anxiety needs to be something that is long-term, sustainable. In other words, it's something you can keep going day after day after day, week after week after week, especially for the bigger licensing exams, right? So something like daily exercise would be helpful. It might be a little difficult to start, but it would help give you an opportunity to relieve some of that anxiety, some of that stress, give you a way to physically work it off. And more than likely, you're not going to have some sort of negative effect that's going to make you burn out or something like that. On the other hand, using strategies like major distractions, while they can be very helpful and can reduce your anxiety, they're not necessarily the best choice for your study period. For example, if you watch a lot of movies just to, kind of relax your mind and take yourself out of it, if you do that a lot, you're going to basically just run out of study time. You're not going to be able to have time to do the studying that you need to do. Other distracting types of strategies, while they may reduce your anxiety, could also interfere with your time, the time you need for studying. So what exactly would be a great strategy during your study period? Well, one of the better strategies, I think, is to find a way that directly targets reducing your anxiety. Interestingly enough, I read a study not too long ago. They said that reading as little as, I think, 6 minutes or something like that can reduce anxiety by as much as 80%. I don't know if that's true for everybody, but in that particular study, it was, by the way, sponsored by a newspaper or some periodical, so who knows if they had a reason behind why they came up with those results. But if reading works for you, then reading something unstudy related might distract you and also kind of relax you. And the reasoning that they gave for the relaxation effect or the reducing anxiety effect is that reading basically engages your brain and helps you focus on something and sort of tunes it into the present reality. So if that works for you, that might be a great strategy. Just make sure you're not reading the great American novel and you get stuck reading it for hours at a time. But, perhaps reading, if you're into news stuff, perhaps reading some sort of news article online, or although that can be very distracting because then notifications pop up, you check email, that kind of stuff. You got to be careful for that, with that kind of thing. So maybe a paper magazine might be your best strategy, or a newspaper if you're into that. It would probably be helpful to have some sort of material that is non-study related, a completely different topic. So in that case, you're getting a little bit of the distraction effect. You're distracting your brain from the focus on studying, while at the same time you're physically doing something that's reducing the anxiety response of your brain. One of the strategies I think I would highly recommend is doing some sort of a mindfulness or meditative kind of thing. Now, I'm a Christian, so I'm not in any way advocating some sort of spiritual connotation to that, but anything that helps you deeply relax would be really helpful. I will be producing some other videos which will teach some of those skills in a step-by-step manner, so look for those. But for right now, I just want to throw out the general ideas to what could be helpful in terms of stress or anxiety reduction during the study period, which has to be something that's primarily useful over a longer period of time. You think of it in terms of it's a marathon rather than a sprint. So moving on to the next part of the licensing exam process. And that's going to be, of course, the pre-exam part. Now, you might be thinking, well, you study and then you go right into the exam, right? Well, there's actually a little time period, and for different people and different circumstances, it may be a little shorter, a little longer, but there's actually a time period just before your licensing exam when you're basically done with your studying, but you aren't actually taking the exam. So, for example, with my wife, she was studying, I don't know, several weeks, actually a few months, before she took her exam. But she took her exam out of the area. So we actually drove to a hotel the night before. I got a very nice hotel. I didn't tell her what the price was because I didn't want her to stress out. But she was very comfortable. And we spent that time driving, we spent that time at the hotel, and then I took her to the testing center in plenty of time so that she was able to take her licensing exam. That pre-period of time, I wanted to be as stress and anxiety-free as possible. I didn't bring up any deep discussions, any problems in our relationship or anything else. Made sure that the hotel was a very nice hotel. Inside, honestly, I was fuming a little because it was a pretty expensive hotel, but I knew what the goal was. We needed to have her in the best frame of mind, the most relaxed frame of mind to take her licensing exam. And so the idea with this pre-exam period of time is you want something that just basically works to relax you, but it doesn't have to allow you to study. It doesn't have to allow you to focus on anything about your test. In fact, I would actually recommend distractive techniques for this particular time period in the licensing exam process. Things like watching a movie, going, maybe if you're having a few days break before you take your license exam, maybe go to a theme park, maybe go to Disneyland or someplace else. Doing something that takes you completely out of the licensing exam process and allows your brain to focus on something else and just kind of forget about it for a little bit of time, and then when you are ready for that licensing exam, they can sort of switch gears and focus right on where you need to be. So, of course, the next part of the licensing exam process is the obvious thing, your exam, right? So what exactly do you need to do during your exam to reduce your anxiety? Now, this is something that I think the very best recommendation I can make to you is something that you have to actually start and prepare for over time, probably during your study period, so that it actually works really well during the licensing exam process itself. And that is basically to build a routine. A set routine whereby you follow exactly the same steps all the way through so that you can do that during the licensing exam process. And while you're doing your studying, you're also practicing this, might say, anxiety reduction routine. Every time that you notice yourself getting a little bit more anxious, take just a few moments to breathe deeply and relax as much as you can, and then move on to the next step. So to give you a specific example, when I took my exam, especially the second exam, the second time, I had to take it twice, I developed a very specific routine. Now, it was recommended by the study material company that I was using, where I would actually take I believe it was 2 pieces of paper, fold them in certain formats, so you basically ended up with, I think, 16 squares. So the edges were where it was folded. It kind of framed out 16 squares on the paper. And the idea was that gave you a certain number of squares that you could use as like little mini notes to help you decide which was the correct answer. And you had those little squares numbered out ahead of time because of the way you folded it, so that you knew you had exactly enough squares to get through the exam. So what I would do during the practice test, which by the way is another strong recommendation I will make, if you get some steady, almost all of the major licensing exams have some company that produces licensing exam preparation materials. And since most licensing exams are now online, I highly recommend getting one that has online practice tests, because then you can basically recreate the licensing exam process almost exactly the way it's actually going to happen. And so what I did was I would go through a set of reminders of kind of the way I wanted to think about the answers to these questions. I would fold this paper, I would write down my reminders on the top of the paper, and I followed that exact sequence every single time I took a practice test. And so then when I got to the licensing exam, the real exam, I followed that exact same process, step by step. What that does is it gets your brain kind of started. I haven't even looked at the first question yet, but by training myself to relax every step of the way during the practice test, it creates an automatic trigger in your brain such that just going through those steps, even though this is the real thing now, you also now have this program trigger to go, relax, calm down, don't stress. And by doing that, it's a very powerful process to start off your exam in a more relaxed and less anxious state. Another thing that I would highly recommend is practicing some method that helps you calm down very quickly. It may or may not be part of this multi-step process, this routine or this ritual that you're practicing for starting your licensing exam. But for me, for example, just taking 2 minutes to close my eyes and focus on my breath and breathe deeply is enough to help calm myself down. And what I do is I'm focusing on the breathing itself, not on anything I'm thinking about. If some thought comes into my head, I just let it go. So even during the middle of a licensing exam, most of the time you will have time enough to at least take 1 or 2 minutes, literally. Most of the time they have some sort of a clock on these licensing exams. You can just close your eyes and just take a minute to focus on your breath. And if your mind wanders, which it probably will in the middle of the licensing exam, what's the next question? I don't know the answer to this one. It's okay, let it go. But it's enough to help bring yourself and your brain and your body back to a lower baseline with less anxiety. Then you open your eyes and go on to the next question. And my final tip or strategy during the exam itself is to anticipate that you're going to run into questions where you just don't know the answer. So plan on it. And again, this is a great thing to practice during the practice test that I'm highly recommending you get. When, not if, but when you get a question that you don't know the answer to, what are the steps you're going to follow to give you the best chance of basically making the best guess? Depending on your licensing exam, I don't know the rules. There are probably different rules for different ones. But in my licensing exam, for example, you're able to kind of mark the question and then come back later to it. So one strategy I had, or one plan, was to make my best guess and then mark it. And if I had time, I could come back later and reassess that question and see if further questions later in the exam had given me a new perspective on what the proper answer might be for that question. Another thing to look into is, depending on your licensing exam, there's a certain type of logic or thinking process that goes with most licensing exams. And if you can learn that really well, then you might be able to identify what would be your best guess. So for example, as a licensed clinical social worker in working in mental health, one of the biggest, highest priorities for the licensing board is safety for our clients. And so if I was totally unsure about the answer, one of the best guesses I could make would be, what is the answer that relates to something that would be dangerous or reduce danger for my particular clients? And if I chose that answer, there was a higher probability that I would be correct, just simply because that's a focus of the board itself and would be more likely the answer than any of the others. The next step. Now you might be wondering, what could possibly be the next step after the exam? Well, in fact, it is the post-exam. Now I realize that you're probably saying, I finished the exam, I'm done with the licensing exam process. Well, probably. I was blessed for the LCSW exam. They did actually give me my score immediately after I finished, and so I knew that I failed the first time on the second test, and I passed the second time. But that isn't always true for every licensing exam. And so for some people, you end up with this period of time where you've taken the test, you've given your best, and then you don't know what the result is. You're just having to basically live with the unknown. And that can be some of the most anxiety-producing situations human beings can go through. We just don't tolerate the unknown very well at all. So since you're not studying for taking the licensing exam again, most likely, because hopefully you probably passed, then I would suggest that anything that reduces your anxiety would probably work, as long as it doesn't interfere with your daily functioning. Now, if you're still working, maybe you're already working in a different position, but your licensing exam would be able to move you up, you need to be able to use whatever anxiety-reducing strategy will allow you to work. But don't be afraid of using distractive techniques. As long as it doesn't distract you from doing the daily activities that you need to do, now, since you're not trying to study and you're not trying to make time for studying, now would be a great time to spend lots of time watching movies or going on trips or something like this, because it's not going to interfere with the result of the exam. The result of the exam is already done. It's set. And all you have to do now is just kind of find ways to relax, reduce your anxiety until you get the result. And then at that point, you'll decide, well, do I have to go back and retake this exam, or can I just celebrate and have an awesome time and take this next step forward in my career? Now, this is something that probably you won't hear from almost anyone else. And that, I believe, is the fifth step, or the fifth part in the licensing exam. And that's your earlier experiences and the learning that you got from those experiences. Now, this is an interesting thing, because you're thinking, well, this isn't part of the licensing exam. It's not part of the studying for it. It's not the part just before the exam. It's not the exam itself. It's not even the part where I'm waiting for the result, the post-exam. How is this related to it in any way? Well, it's related because in many ways it forms the foundation for everything else. Your earlier experiences in life create the way you think about exams. They create the beliefs you have about yourself, your confidence, your ability to take and pass exams. So, for example, let's say that earlier in your life, maybe in grade school even, you came in and you took an exam. It's probably a pretty simple exam in grade school, right? First, second grade. But somehow or another, you didn't do as well on it as you would like to have. And perhaps maybe your teacher made some comment about you in front of the entire class, and you felt incredibly embarrassed. Well, that experience goes into your brain and gets stored there. And there's an interesting thing about our brain. Our brain automatically, without us making any effort whatsoever, stores and tags experiences that are extremely negative or painful as a threat type of experience. Because while it may not have been a threat to your physical well-being, in other words, you weren't going to actually die, right? We say we die of embarrassment, but you don't actually physically die. But on an emotional level, it can be extremely threatening. And so it literally gets your brain programmed with that kind of experience. And so then going forward in the future, anytime you have an exam, it gets filtered through the lens of that learning. And so just the idea of taking a licensing exam can feel extremely threatening simply because you've had this earlier experience that taught your brain exam equals high anxiety, like I'm going to die from it kind of anxiety. I'm going to die from embarrassment kind of anxiety. And so those kinds of things can actually create a a big foundation and a barrier to your success in your licensing exam by creating an automatic trigger for high anxiety. So what do you do about it? Well, in the end, that's kind of a topic for a different video because I got to end this. This has been going on for a while. But the short answer is you need to find a way to pull back or review those experiences and then relearn them. So you need to rewire your brain so that those types of experiences no longer trigger the really high levels of anxiety that those earlier experiences had programmed your brain to produce. Now, one of the best ways that I know of to do that is through a technique called emotional freedom techniques. It's also known as tapping. Now, I'm going to give you a really short overview of it right now just to tell you about it and kind of the general gist of how it works. But the idea is that you tap different meridian points on your body while you're actually reliving, mentally reviewing some of these earlier experiences that could have programmed your brain for high anxiety. The interesting thing about this is that while you're tapping on these points and mentally reviewing these previously very negative or anxiety-producing experiences, your brain opens up the exact neural pathways where that experience is stored in your brain. And now that it's been opened up, as in you're remembering it, it offers your brain the opportunity to rework or rewire those same neural circuits. The tapping, I believe, sends a calming signal to the amygdala part of your brain, which is the fight, flight, or freeze response alarm system, basically. And it tells your brain, it's okay, I'm calm, I'm safe. And so now you're opening up that exact same experience, but now you're feeling the experience in a different way because you're calmer due to the tapping. Now, there's some other things that go along with it, and if you work with an experienced practitioner, they can guide you into saying things, not magic phrases, okay, but saying things that can trigger your brain to initiate further changes and basically reprogram the trigger that's been created by that earlier experience. When you do that, then when you go forward and you face an exam, it just doesn't trigger the same response. I really like the phrase that one of my clients used. It's kind of like trying to light a firecracker and the fuse is gone. It's just not there. It doesn't blow up anymore. It used to bother me so much and now it's just gone. Now, of course, that's when EFT's been very successful and really removed it completely. We don't always get those kind of results every single time, especially in one session. Sometimes it takes multiple sessions. But that is literally the depth of how well this process can work. It can literally rewire the neural circuitry that holds onto that memory and is programmed that trigger for anxiety in your brain, such that when you face that trigger in the future, i.e. an exam, that it no longer triggers anxiety. Now, since it's an important exam, it's part of your licensing process, it's pretty unlikely you're going to have zero anxiety. But it will certainly bring it down enough so that you can still function, you can concentrate, you can remember what you studied and be able to focus on the exam and just kind of feel the nerves and jitters that everybody feels. I'm not aware of anyone that doesn't have at least a little bit of nervousness when taking an exam that has such a big impact on your future. And to a certain extent, a little bit of nerves is actually helpful. It helps you focus and pay attention. Wow, this is important. Brain, look at this. We got to focus on this. So that's a good thing. So there you have it. The 5 parts to the licensing exam process. The study portion, the pre-exam portion, the exam step, the post-exam step, and then that foundation layer of all those earlier experiences that you've learned and have been programmed into your brain that influence how you perceive and respond to all these other steps. In future videos, I will be trying to put together the basics of EFT and other ways in which you can make peace with those events that happened in the past so that you can go through the 5 steps of the licensing exam process, especially the 4, with much less anxiety. And one final idea for reducing your anxiety when taking your licensing exams. I firmly believe that God has a design for each and every single person. And it is entirely possible that taking and passing your licensing exam will open up your ability to move forward in your career, but also to help people at a deeper level and give you higher, greater satisfaction and greater fulfillment in your job and your career. And I believe that could be part of God's design for your life. And having that sense, now whether you believe in God from a Christian perspective or some other perspective, or don't believe in God at all, is entirely up to you. But if you have some sense that there's some bigger purpose, some bigger source out there that's guiding your life, then facing the exam licensing process, the licensing exam process, get that right, can be less anxiety producing because you have a certain amount of faith that whatever is going to happen, whatever the results are going to be, it's going to work out in a way that it's supposed to, in a way that's going to be good for you and the world around you. For us as Christians, there's actually a Bible text that literally says, "For all things work together for those that love the Lord." Now, I'd like to ask one really big favor of you. Could you go down in the comments section and answer 2 questions for me? First of all, what licensing exam are you preparing for, or have you taken and are trying to finish? And second of all, what is your biggest struggle with anxiety in the licensing exam process? The reason I would like to have that information is because I'm going to be continuing to make some more videos related to this, and eventually I'm going to be creating an online course about reducing anxiety related to licensing exams so we can have less anxiety and more confidence. But the only way I can do it and answer your questions appropriately is if I know exactly what it is that are your biggest challenges. So please, go to the comments below and answer those 2 questions. What licensing exam are you preparing for? And what is your biggest #1 question or struggle with anxiety and preparing for your licensing exam? Thank you so much for watching, and have a blessed day.